Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Suburbural Tongue. In this episode, I got to have a conversation with Pamela Rossi-Keen. She helps run the Genesis Collective out in Aliquippa, PA, as well as doing some other creatively minded projects. In this episode, this was the first and only so far recording where we got to do it over Zoom, and I try to get in person as much as I can with my guests, but this was an interesting departure from that. And audio quality wise, this definitely is one of the best sounding episodes, so hopefully you all appreciate that part. Um, in this episode, Pamela and I talked a lot about small towns, inequality, art, history. We talked a lot about the Renaissance, which I loved personally. And we even snuck a little bit of Alice in Wonderland in there. So I hope you all enjoy. You will notice, if you haven't already throughout these episodes, that I have a bit of a habit of asking very long-winded questions that at the end up not really being questions and more being statements. But hey, this is a conversation after all. So, but again, this is Suburbural Tongue. I hope you all enjoy.
We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. All right, welcome back to another episode of Suburbural Tongue. Today I'm interviewing Pamela Rossi-Keen. We met in Pittsburgh while we were both attending a workshop on budgeting for nonprofits. That's what it is. And I was very interested from talking to her about her nonprofit to get her on the podcast and to kind of get her thoughts on art, on nonprofits in general, and just on kind of the work that she's done. So I'm going to start off kind of with a overarching question. So just from like looking at your LinkedIn, at some like articles that you've been a part of, I see that you're a very busy person. We, like I said, met at a workshop about budgeting for artists and
Yeah.
nonprofits. And that's where I found out about your work with the Genesis Collective, but I also see that you're involved with Slippery Rock and Robert Morris universities. So what does that sort of juggle of responsibilities look like for you? I guess what I'm really interested in here, I think, is kind of holistically, how does each individual role shape your approach to the others?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Caleb. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. And it was good to meet you at the Pittsburgh Public Theater event. Well, my affiliation with Robert Morris, I teach adjunct, but with adjunct, we're a unionized
Hmm.
labor force. And so we do a lottery for classes. And I actually haven't taught for several semesters now. So that hasn't been too much of a juggle. And Slippery Rock is not really an affiliation of mine, except that my board actually, of the six people on my board, five of them are alumni, which was not an intentional thing, but they
Oh.
really, yeah. But also early on in our organization, we were part of a grant
Hmm.
that the National Endowment for the Humanities gave to the Humanities Foundation at Slippery Rock, and Slippery Rock funneled that into Aliquippa, and we founded a concert series that we're in season 3 of that now, but that's really our association with Slippery Rock.
So what do you do with the concert series that you were talking about? What is that?
Sure. Well, so the Genesis Collective is in Beaver County,
Hmm.
and basically Beaver County, it requires kind of a backstory, but Beaver County has these little steel towns that have been built by steel and then
Hmm.
abandoned by steel, and so you have a lot of kind of gutted communities, and some of these are small urban communities. We have suburban communities and also some rural areas. So um, in these urban areas in particular, there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of hopelessness. And I don't want to say that, uh, I don't want to suggest that everybody there is hopeless or feels hopeless. That's absolutely the opposite of what the Genesis Collective is about. But we really do focus a lot of our attention on these underserved communities because we want to level the playing field for who gets to speak into the public sphere. And there are a lot of creative people in these communities. what these communities aren't, is a destination
Hmm.
for a night out on the town. So what we do with Uncommon Concerts and Conversations, it's two-pronged. One is to bring music lovers into the community. So we'll have a chamber choir one week and then a soul singer the next. Um, and these performers are compensated to come to perform and then also to just have a conversation with the community. So last year we had a jazz trio and a little boy came up to the saxophonist after and said, I really like jazz music, but I never knew what it looked like to play it live.
Oh,
And
that's so
it
cool.
I know, and it just made her day because that's what you want
Yeah.
as a musician. Like, oh, you see me, you appreciate what I'm doing, and it interests you. So that's one thing to get people in, but it's also for the people. You are worth beauty. You are worth
Hmm.
excellent music. You might look at this and say, hey, I never saw a saxophone live. I want to understand what what that life is about. So that's Uncommon Concerts and Conversations.
Well, I'm glad we got into that so quickly here because that sort of, I guess, ethos behind what you're doing with Genesis Collective, I think is what made me so interested in it, because especially to get on this podcast, because I kind of see my podcast as a way to do that same sort of thing. I come
Hmm.
from another one of those towns like you talk about, where it was made by steel, built by steel, and now it's kind of abandoned by steel. I live
Yeah.
more in like the central PA area, but like kind of this
Uh-huh.
whole state has those all over the place. And I recently, and what led me to kind of, getting interested in making this sort of podcast where I can talk to small businesses, nonprofits, artists, that sort of thing,
Hmm.
is really opening my eyes to kind of looking around my town and kind of shedding that kind of childlike idea I had that everyone feeds you when you're here of like, oh, there's nothing to do, there's nothing
Uh-huh.
interesting happening.
Yeah.
It's all just drugs and there's no like no, there's nothing.
Right.
And then you actually go and look around and you just see this like vast wealth, this explosive plethora of things that people are doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I found that very interesting that that was what you guys are also focused on with the Genesis Collective. And
Uh-huh.
so I think we can kind of focus on the collective specifically now. We've been talking about the mission objective of it, and that was like what got me interested here. So let's just kind of summarize to give it a name kind of for the Genesis Collective. What is its specific mission and what is your
Mhm.
role in the company? I think is a good place to start.
Sure. So we started in 2021, and our mission is to support artists in their work and
Mm,
connect the public with art and creativity. And that looks like a bunch of different things. Some of it is educating young people
mm,
or adults in craft, in certain artistic disciplines. Sometimes it looks like installing public art. Sometimes it looks like broad community projects. We're wrapping up our second of the summer, actually. We're calling them the Tomorrow Project. We wrapped up one in Aliquippa, and we'll do one in Beaver Falls next Saturday. But um, basically we asked the community what they want to see in their town in 10 and 20 years,
mhm,
and then we invited artists from that community to respond to that, and then we had a panel of community members decide which piece would get created, and
mhm,
then that artist was compensated to create that piece, could hire help, and then we'll have their celebration with the reveal of that piece. So that's just a way to connect, not only put the beauty in the community, but also give the community ownership of their space. You're talking, Caleb, about your town and how you kind of get this Eeyore attitude, like wah, wah, nothing good. And I feel like that here. I live in Aliquippa, and that is one of the urban centers of not an urban center, but it's one of the urban communities within Beaver County. Um, we get the sense that we have to take what's handed to us. And, now Beaver County is the site of the largest petrochemical investment. Um, this shell fracking facility that just plowed under my childhood home, not my home house, but like the route to get from the mall to my mom's is just now a giant polluting factory, and we
mhm,
took it, and we didn't actually have to take it if we were mobilized and organized and understood our power much earlier. And I'm not saying Shell's not a massive force that could plow people under, but there was a
Mhm.
lot of speaking, a lot of dreaming we could have been doing. And that's what I want, you know? So that's kind of, I want the artistic prophets to speak, and I want people to connect with their creative and prophetic voice, even if they're not artists. If you're surrounded by imagination, you start to trust your own imagination.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that is there's no way for artists to make a living here. So we're making a way.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we're grant funded, and we create commissions, and we generate opportunities to not only train artists in entrepreneurship, which is why I was at that training with you,
Mhm.
to learn what can I bring back to Beaver County and the creatives there. Um, you know, just creating opportunity and training to make their business a more viable option for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that, um that always bothers me too, I think, and it is definitely a philosophy that seems to be kind of nailed into the head whenever you grow up in places like where you come from, where I come from, where
Mhm.
it used to be something, but it's not
Yeah.
something anymore. So
Yeah.
people still hold on to this notion like it could be something, but then
Mhm.
no one is, like you said, no one's kind of banding together to make it something.
Yeah.
So with your focus with the Genesis Collective on sort of revitalizing the art scene, because
Mhm.
art very much plays the invigorating role in society, where it gets people motivated, it gets people to feel some sort of pride for their area more so than
Yeah.
just the geography of it. um how do you see, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, this the work you're doing now, the groundwork you're laying now, affecting your community in the long run?
I love that question, and I don't think I've ever been asked that. I mean, and I fill out grant applications at least weekly, and have never been asked that. I want the impact to be beauty everywhere.
Mhm.
I want public art. I want things that are quirky and odd and awe-inspiring to be on every main street and side alley. Um, and I want all the kids that we're training to trust their imagination to
Mhm.
create a life for themselves and their community and their future. You know, we get a lot of people complaining, oh, they don't want the jobs that are here. They don't want the jobs that are here. That doesn't
Yeah,
align with who they are. So figuring out who they are as creators, we're all creators, Caleb. I mean,
yeah.
whether we're artists or not, we're all creators. You know, I want people to be creating their own future. And I want the trust of leadership in this region to say, oh, this does matter. My
Mhm.
community is safer. Educational work has better outcomes because there's art here. People want to buy homes here. They want to spend their free time and their free money in Beaver County. I mean, the bottom line is not my big thing, but it is for a lot of civic leaders.
Mhm.
That's fine, but I want them to understand having beauty around you and inspiration around you actually does yield that very practical result.
Mhm. Um, so on from that end, talking about building up the generation of kind of kids that there are right now in the area, and teaching
Mhm.
them to look to look at themselves and see how amazing that inner soul can be if you feed it properly, kind of.
Yeah.
Um, you were talking about the work that you guys are doing with schools, with
Mhm.
teaching kids there. Is that like, are you doing that with programs within the schools? Or are you doing it extracurricularly? Like, how does that part look?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of, and this is advice that I got starting out, and I think it's so sound, and it's borne itself out that partnerships with established entities that already have the trust of the community, like the school system or a non you know a youth development organization that's been in the
Mhm.
community for 10 or 20 years. They have the trust of families, and so we have partnered alongside these groups in the schools. We've done some relationship building work, some joint grant writing. We haven't really had programs too much in the schools, but extracurricular or after school programs. It's interesting. We could still address something that's not really in the schools. So like if a school district we did this in one district that didn't have theater education,
Mm-hmm.
the after school program discovered, oh, these kids can't read a script. They don't understand why this is set up this way, or,
Yeah.
what's a prop, and like really no theater experience at all. And it gave us the opportunity to provide something creative in a sports town, but that was creative,
Mm-hmm.
that the kids could follow from beginning to end, learn and execute, display, and be proud of. So we developed a theater program that we put in their camp that they do every summer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a way that we kind of partner, we kind of observe the need that's there,
Mm-hmm.
and then partner with somebody who can help us to execute it.
Cool.
Also, we do an independent thing. It's called 3E, Art Education, Entrepreneurship, and Exhibition. And it's art education that we run, our artists run, for middle and high school students, that is paired with some entrepreneurship training. And then they have an art market at the end. And that's
Oh,
not with a partner. That's
mm-hmm.
just kind of, one of our programs.
I like that. So kind of, okay, so then beyond the work with the schools and with children, I've read a couple articles about like some artists that your collective has supported. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like on the adult side of your art following, like what have you guys seen there impact wise?
Yeah, sure. Let me think. Well, we have a team of storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, the chief storyteller, Christopher Paget, he's actually in the next room working on some editing. And he does, when you see videos, that's something he's created. Or
Yeah.
photography, we have a photographer, Aaron Ninehauser, who is fantastic and does a lot of beautiful documentary community work. So we are supporting artists in that way by just having them on
Mm-hmm.
our team. But in other ways, you know, we develop programs for the public that then turn into something. So we had a partnership with a local historical society. We have Underground Railroad stops that run through New Brighton, which is
Mm-hmm.
one of our communities. And what we were going to do, and this wasn't my idea, this was the head of the Children's Museum came up with this idea. We were going to create paintings from an Afrocentric perspective
Mm-hmm.
that would be placed like stumbling stones that they have in Berlin to remember Holocaust victims,
Oh yeah.
outside these houses, these grand houses that are sort of, effigies to, the white savior kind of
Yeah.
storyline. But we wanted this, no, the lives that came through here are the thing,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we really need to make sure that we're acknowledging this. The partnership fell apart for what I can only call racist reasons. But we were able to fund this artist to create this series of paintings. He had several exhibit opportunities, not just in Beaver County, but in Pittsburgh and in Westmoreland County. He got a lot of attention for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's his Marlin Gist. And it's helped his career in that way. In 2021, we did um, we called it Being Black in Beaver County. And that could mean whatever the Black creative wanted it to mean. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what it feels like. This is what I want it to be. Like, however they interpreted it was fine. But it was just for Black creatives, this exhibit. And there were a couple people that not only got teaching artist opportunities out of that, but had real career shifts
Mm-hmm.
after that, with just the connections they made, both in this community and in Allegheny County, which is where a lot of our funding and a lot of our opportunities for these artists come from. So it just works out when your goal is giving and serving. It
Mm-hmm.
just tends to mushroom, and it's really kind of fun because it feels like magic.
Yeah. So talking about that artist who you were working on that stumbling block project for, where you would put it outside
Mhm.
of the houses,
Yeah.
that got me thinking, and I kind of want to hear what your idea of this is, because I feel like we probably have a pretty similar thought on it. But you always hear kind of the line where it's, you have to learn history so it doesn't repeat itself, and then
Yeah.
you just watch these events happening day to day, and you're just like, if you only would have, read
It's
something,
sickening.
this
Yeah.
happens every 80 years or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Um, Beyond just kind of like history, I think art plays a really important role in that, because you can read a textbook and you can understand on a very base level, what happened in the year 1701. But then
Yeah.
if you look at a painting from the year 1701, you understand how people felt back
Yeah.
then. And I think
Yeah.
I think the beautiful thing is you realize that people have always sort of felt the same, kind of tying into that idea that we were talking about earlier, where you are presented with these challenges in community, in your country, where you feel like you don't really have a voice to change it, and you just kind of
Yeah.
have to let it steamroll you down.
Uh,
What kind of role do you see art as playing in that? I mean, beyond what I've said, like, what are your thoughts on that, of how
yeah.
you can look at, of how art can make a change in that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite, I mean, my training is in art history, and one of my favorite periods, I mean, I know this is kind of cliche, but it's Renaissance Italy, Renaissance
It's a great
Florence in
period. I
particular.
love I love
Yeah.
Renaissance.
Yeah, but the Medici who funded all of these, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle named artists, they, some of the stuff that was going on while they were in leadership, and I think about, in particular, Michelangelo's statue of David.
Hmm.
Obviously, you look at this, it's a beautiful form, it's a beautiful man, and it's, just this stunning example. Well, what else is it? Well, it's also an example of the political move of the time, because David's the underdog. Well, so is Florence. And we have David ready to hurl this stone at his oppressor, right?
Yeah.
He has his eyes are fixed, and his hand is grasping this stone like, any second you're getting yours. And it's placed right outside in the main Piazza Vecchio, right in front of the main administrative building where the Medici worked.
Hmm.
Um, and the narrative was familiar. Why was it familiar? Because it was a Catholic country, a Catholic city, right? So we have the biblical narrative of David and Goliath. So we have this strange symbology. We have this activist moment, and we have something that is not only decorative but inspirational. It's a rallying cry for the people of Florence. And that's what art does. And when we started in 2020, I was facilitating this conversation with artists. I tell this story at least once a week,
Hmm.
because it just goes to show, I mean, the faith I have in this modality to exact change. So we didn't have a vaccine for COVID. George
Hmm.
Floyd had just been murdered, and we're all stuck on Zoom. Like, this was our whole life. We're just sitting, no leader, no brilliant person, no politician, nobody could tell us what to do or how to fix any of it. The racism, COVID, nothing. We were just stuck. But I'm facilitating this conversation with artists who were commissioned. This is pre-Genesis Collective, to respond to this dual pandemic. And what I saw were celebrations of our creativity in the face of this hardship.
Hmm.
I saw examples of the oppression of Black women and how they're carrying everything on this burning globe on their backs.
Hmm.
I saw these reminders that we were all children. Like, no matter, you don't want a mask, or you think this is all fake, or you love Anthony Fauci, whatever it is, these kids were playing telephone in this sculpture. They're just kids. We were all that kid.
Yeah.
And I just thought, this is the way we all come to that sculpture of kids playing telephone and say, I don't know what it means. Red state, blue state, conservative or progressive, or, different religion, whatever. We have to come to art vulnerable. And that's where the power is, because it locks in your imagination, but it also enables you to meet your other, the person you don't agree with, you don't know, in this same spot of vulnerability. When I
Mhm.
stand before the statue of David, or 16th century Florentine stand before that, we all have to ask some questions. And that is, so instead of just beating each other over the head, we can come with questions. And that's
Mhm.
vulnerable and human. That's what I think the power is,
Yeah.
because we need a little humility, all of us.
I definitely feel that. I remember I mean, as much as we all don't like talking about the pandemic itself, I always, I always remind people, because I love to force myself to look at negative events and be like, where can you draw some positivity out of this? Like, we
Oh,
can't
that's
just make this.
interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I maybe like get a little bit annoying with it sometimes, where I'm like, guys, we just have to make this. But I mean, I think really, if you it's a posturing, where if you keep posturing yourself to see these negative events as positive. I can look at the pandemic now, and I honestly, like, I was like a middle teenager in the pandemic. So like I wasn't like young teenager,
Yeah.
I wasn't old teenager. So
Uh-huh.
that definitely hit me at like a very important stage in my life. And I
Yeah.
think I was thinking this while you were saying this. If I look back on the pandemic and kind of all the things that were going wrong, I think the one thing that kept me afloat was art. And it's like that
Mm.
was what was interesting because before, I mean, because my whole life I've always loved art. I've always loved drawing. I've always loved writing. But during the pandemic, it gave this time where I could focus my attention on the things that interested me. And because of that, you
Mhm.
can delve even deeper into these things. And I mean, I think coming out of it, I think I was a whole different person, but at the same point, it was also I was the person who I was always kind of building myself to. And I mean,
Mm.
talking about the David, I think Michelangelo was the one who they say that it was a Michelangelo quote, but it might be apocryphal, but he talks about his role as an artist is looking at a piece of stone, or as a sculptor, looking at a piece of stone and seeing the person who's locked inside of it and
Yeah.
breaking down. And I've
Cutting
all,
away everything that's not it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you start off as the stone, and then you just like but you're always the person underneath the stone, but the stone
Mm.
always needs broken away. And so
Mm.
I think when I was saying earlier that, I think we would have a pretty similar view on art. I think that's kind of where our similarity is, because that's what that's what you were talking about, where you said that the role of art in society is to it's to remind us of who we are. It's to remind us of that child inside of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is really beautiful about the Genesis Collective. What do you, how do you put this? How do you go about in the Genesis Collective kind of posturing the people who you're supporting to see their inner child when they are embracing art?
This is a conversation that has been like a voice text book over the past couple of weeks. Uh, because when you're dealing with artists, there's a lot of neurodiversity.
Yes.
And whether you want to say, oh, this is, in the DSM manual, you're going to diagnose something, or just like behaviors that would be consistent with some neurodiversity,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it. It's almost like there is kind of a not childishness, a childlikeness,
Hmm.
when you're a creative person and you just want to understand, and the only way you understand is by generating something,
Hmm.
exploring your medium with your hands and your mind. Um, so I don't actually have the problem of, of creating that atmosphere for artists. The only time I guess I would is when people don't know that they're artists.
Hmm.
So when we first started, we wanted this very much to, in order to level the playing field of who gets to say what, we really had to spend a lot of time and attention in minority communities. Um, and we were doing that work, and our team, we have good representation on our team and on our board, and allies, and so we were having these like really honest, frank conversations and doing our best, but something was off, like our language or something. And some people in the community were just gracious enough to talk with me and say, like, there's a lot of creative people in this community. We're not artists. Like, artists are people who paint and then they sell their painting, and they sip a drink and they create things, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
So we really shifted our language. We do still say artists a lot, but we really talk about creatives.
Hmm.
Because I mean, we have a consultant that we work with who does beautiful work, uh, doing some of our verbiage for like fundraising
Hmm.
campaigns and things like that. But she's also a photographer and a painter and a perpetual doodler. And I've tried to convince her, you can call yourself an artist. You do this all day.
Yeah.
So there are people who are kind of like, who would have adapted well to adulting,
Hmm.
that have a hard time saying that they're artists. But the people who have committed to a creative life don't have a hard time inhabiting that childlike space. They have a harder time adulting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a,
I feel
I
this.
never thought of it.
I
Yeah,
definitely
I
feel like
mean,
that. I feel like you're describing me right now.
I have a son about your age who's like that too. It's like, I know you wrote this paper that could belong in the Yale Law Review, but now I need you to turn it in, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think to that point, kind of the difference between having the childlike kind of sight and having the adulting sort of view where it's like everything needs to be compartmentalized into its usefulness. I think maybe the
Yes.
friend that you're talking about, what I'm hearing, I think a lot from her and what I feel like people misunderstand about art nowadays, is how do you put this? I think as society develops and as the development of society requires more and more compartmentalization. Oh my gosh, I can't talk right now.
Mhm.
Like I was saying, so like every person needs their role. Um,
Yeah.
people kind of forget that they can do things that aren't a role. So like I think it's
That's
breaking
good.
it's breaking yourself out of that. Like if you are, let's just say like a chef at a restaurant or something, that doesn't mean that everything you do has to be related to your being a chef at a restaurant. That can just be the way that can just be the thing that keeps you like alive, by making money to, want to do the other things that you can do.
That's so important to remember. It's
Yeah.
harder as you get older and you stack responsibilities. But I mean, I know a couple weeks ago, my family left. They went to grandma's for the weekend, and I'm just so used to going 100 miles an hour professionally and personally. And I sat down and I thought, I don't really know what to do right now. It's very weird.
Yeah, I feel that same way. I mean, like we were talking about the Renaissance, there's the idea of like the Renaissance person where it's just a person of many talents. And like
Yeah.
now you read like the deconstructional, like people trying to deconstruct the idea of the Renaissance person, and they're like, it's not even possible anymore. You can't have that many interests. And it's like you can have that many interests. It's just not all of your interests need to be producing. They don't not all need to be inputs that lead to an output of money that comes back to you. Like
Right.
they can just be things that are feeding that inner artist inside of you that is going to help you become a person who can kind of drive your community forward and can drive yourself
Yeah.
forward.
Well, and if you look at the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, he advertised, if you read Vasari's Life of the Artist,
Yeah.
Leonardo da Vinci's letters to a duke were advertising his services as a military weapon designer.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with art, but then you look at his sketchbooks and you think, "Oh my gosh, you're literally everything. You're, a scientist and a botanist and an artist," and
Yeah.
yeah, but he
Yeah.
was a weapons engineer.
Leonardo da Vinci is a fascinating person to look at, just like all the different things that
Uh-huh.
all everything that he was able to do.
Yeah.
And I think that looking at the Genesis Collective and looking at the work that you're doing there and kind of feeding artists and feeding the community to lead to things, happening, like I said, 5, 10 years down the line. I think that's kind of what the goal is, even if no one is saying it directly. It's let's make everyone a Renaissance person. Like let's make everyone people of many talents and turn this, kind of depressing world on the onset into something like Alice in Wonderland, where it's just like
Oh,
every
I love
place.
that. Yeah,
That's what I
for
was thinking this whole
sure.
time. Yeah, Alice. I mean, because that's what I love about Alice in Wonderland is like there was nothing more depressing than 1800s London, but Lewis Carroll was able to look at 1800s London and see all that stuff. And I think that is that's the role of the artist is to be able to look at, kind of the sad objectiveness of reality, like the things that you can say where it's just I think the best way to put this is actually in the last episode I recorded for the podcast, my guest I was talking to brought up the locuses of control. There's
Mhm.
the external locus of control and the internal locus of control. And the external locus of control is people are going to look at the world and think that it's all out to get them and that it's all out to affect them. But then it takes someone with an internal locus of control to look at all that and to say, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it my own way. And it's the people who can
Yes.
look at it and do it their own way who go and, become the Leonardo da Vinci's and go and sculpt the Davids so that 1,000
Yeah.
years, 800 years down the line, someone can look at that thing and be like, I get that person.
And it's important to see that. They always talk about representation, you can become what you can see.
Hmm.
And, you and I are both from a dominant, demographic, and that might seem like, "Oh, whatever," to us because we see ourselves
Hmm.
everywhere, we're both white people and intelligent people, and so we see ourselves everywhere. But if you wanna see things differently, you have to see that you're able to see things differently. You're allowed to do that here because not everyone has the aggressive posture that, "Well, I'm gonna do it anyhow," you
Yeah.
know? You're talking about Alice in Wonderland, that's actually, from the Mad Hatter. We have Mad About Art is our theme for our end of
Hmm.
the year exhibit, and our art around this is taking some illustrations of community landmarks and just painting the crap out of them and having artists doing art over every square inch of it. So
I
I
love that.
appreciate what you said. I'll
That's
send it to you when it's done. It's due tomorrow. So
when.
hopefully Jacob will do his job. No, he's got a great imagination.
I love that. So to kind of
Mhm.
start closing off the episode,
Sure.
because Zoom's starting to yell at me that I need to be
Yep.
finishing off, I ask a variant of this question to all of my guests. And so us both coming from an art background, I'm excited to see what you say here. But
Mhm.
we've kind of already touched on a couple of these things already, so we can kind of say this in summary. But I believe that someone's creative output into the world affects them just as much as they affect it, kind of as we were
Mhm.
talking about.
Mhm.
So how have all of your avenues of your career, especially with the collective, affected your life overall, and how have they shaped you into who you are now?
Mm. Um, it's reminded me that I'm an artist. I spent my entire young life as a creative person and as a musician, a pretty serious musician. And then I started in late high school really beating myself into submission in terms of making sure I was playing by all the rules and accomplishing things and getting things done. And I did. I have, but the reminder that no, you're a creator too, and you have the right to do this. That's been really important. The other thing is, as a mother, and this might sound cliche, but it's the thing I love about teaching. It's the thing I love about grant writing and creating programs and supporting artists. It's nurturing. It's always like, you can do this, go. That's pretty much a through line in my life. And so, it's been a great way to just continue that and develop that.
Well, I hate to have to end this episode. It seems like so quickly, but it's already been almost 40 minutes. I definitely want to I definitely want to get another episode in here at some point, maybe in person next time.
That'd be great.
But I've enjoyed having you on here. I hope that who's going to listen to this, it affects them and that they can learn something from it, and that maybe it kind of unlocks their inner artist as well. Because I mean, I feel like that is the most important part in life, is to realize that you're still a kid even if you're not 7 years old anymore.
Amen. Yep, I agree.
So it's been great getting to talk to you today,
You
and I
too,
hope to see you
Caleb.
on here
Thank you.
again.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And that's a wrap on this episode. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Just like with all the other episodes, I recorded this in the summertime, and now about halfway through autumn, I'm getting to releasing it, where I record the intro and the outro, and I do the final mixing for it. And getting to, think through all these ideas with this new autumnal lens that I'm being surrounded with the trees all changing colors and the leaves starting to fall away, has really got me to, I think about the ideas that Pamela and I talked about in this episode in a bit of a new light, you could say. And I think really what I took out of this, and what I hope that you guys took out of this, is that no matter how gray or weird or even colorful your world looks, you can always make it a little more artistic. And it's waiting for you to make it a little more artistic. Have a good day, guys. Stay tuned for the next episode.